For years, my husband preached integrity in the courtroom while mocking me behind closed doors. When I discovered his business trips were really hotel getaways with a younger woman, I didn't confront him. I just played one small trick, and soon he was terrified to take his clothes off while everyone knew the reason why. My name is Melissa. I'm 41, and I live in Dallas, Texas. I've been married to Daniel, a successful attorney, for 17 years. To the outside world, he was the perfect husband. Sharp suits, big cases, important business trips. But I learned the truth the hard way, and what I did about it changed everything. For 17 years, I watched Daniel transform from the charming law student I married into someone I barely recognized. Every morning, he'd stand in front of our bathroom mirror, adjusting his Italian silk ties and practicing his closing arguments. "Integrity, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he'd rehearse, gesturing at his reflection like he was addressing the Supreme Court instead of our toothbrush holder. "Integrity is the foundation of justice." Unfortunately, Daniel's idea of integrity was more like a designer suit, something he put on for public appearances and hung up the moment he got home. The morning routine was always the same theatrical performance. Daniel would emerge from his walk-in closet wearing perfectly pressed shirts that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget, Italian leather shoes that he polished religiously every Sunday, and cologne that announced his arrival from 3 rooms away. He'd stand at our kitchen island, scrolling through his phone while I prepared his breakfast exactly the way he liked it. Steel-cut oats with blueberries, fresh orange juice, and coffee that had to be Colombian, single origin, or he'd make that face like I'd personally offended his ancestors. "Melissa, where's my lucky cufflinks?" he'd bark from the bedroom, as if I were his personal valet rather than his wife of nearly 2 decades. When I'd remind him they were in his jewelry box where they always were, he'd give me that look, the one that said I was slightly less useful than his smartphone and considerably more irritating. "You know, honey," he'd say in that patronizing tone that made my teeth clench, "most wives remember where their husband's important things are kept. It's called being supportive." I'd bite my tongue and hand him the cufflinks, watching as he fastened them with the self-satisfied air of someone who believed the universe revolved around his perfectly manicured presence. The irony wasn't lost on me that a man who spent so much time polishing his image had somehow forgotten to work on the actual substance underneath. At dinner parties, Daniel would regale everyone with stories of his latest courtroom victories, his voice taking on that rich, commanding tone that probably served him well with juries. "The key to winning cases," he'd announce, swirling his wine like some legal sommelier who discovered the secret to justice in a vintage Cabernet, "is understanding people's weaknesses. You find their vulnerabilities, and you exploit them strategically." He'd glance at me with a smile that looked warm to everyone else, but felt cold as January rain. "Isn't that right, honey? You have to know exactly which buttons to push." I'd nod and refill his glass, playing my part in the performance we'd been rehearsing for 17 years. Our friends would nod appreciatively, impressed by Daniel's legal wisdom and his apparent devotion to including his wife in his professional insights. What they couldn't see was the subtle cruelty in his words, the way he'd chosen them specifically to remind me that he knew all my buttons too, and wasn't afraid to push them when it suited his purposes. "You're so lucky," my neighbor Mrs. Patterson would tell me after these gatherings, her eyes bright with what looked suspiciously like envy. "Daniel's such a devoted husband, and so successful. You must feel so proud watching him in court." If devoted meant working late 4 nights a week and taking mysterious business trips twice a month, then sure, he was devoted. And if successful meant earning enough money to afford our lifestyle while making sure I never forgot who was really in charge of our household, then yes, he was definitely successful at that too. The truth was, I hadn't watched Daniel in court in over 3 years. The last time I'd attended one of his trials, he'd spent the entire car ride home criticizing everything from my outfit choice to the way I'd introduced myself to his colleagues. "Melissa, you can't just tell people you're a stay-at-home wife like it's something to be proud of," he'd said, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. "These are professional people. You need to sound more sophisticated." What should I have said? I'd asked, genuinely confused about what was wrong with being honest about my life. "I don't know. Something about your volunteer work, your book club, your interests. Anything that makes you sound like you have some purpose beyond following me around like a lost puppy." That had been the moment I realized Daniel was embarrassed by me. Not just occasionally annoyed or frustrated, but genuinely ashamed that I was his wife. After that, I'd stopped attending his professional events, telling myself it was because I preferred staying home rather than facing the truth that he preferred it when I wasn't there. The house would feel different on the nights Daniel worked late, which had become increasingly frequent over the past 2 years. Without his constant presence filling every room with opinions about how things should be done, the space felt larger somehow, more like home and less like a museum dedicated to his achievements. I could cook what I wanted for dinner, instead of whatever would properly complement his sophisticated palate. I could watch romantic comedies without listening to his commentary about how unrealistic the legal procedures were. I could exist without constantly calculating whether my actions would meet with his approval. But then he'd come home, usually around 10 or 11, smelling like expensive restaurant food and making a point of discussing his challenging day with the kind of detailed enthusiasm that made it clear he expected my complete attention and admiration. He'd describe complex legal strategies and high-stakes negotiations as if he were narrating an action movie, pausing occasionally to explain particularly sophisticated concepts in terms he thought I might understand. "You probably don't realize this, Melissa, but what I did today was essentially save our client from bankruptcy," he'd say, loosening his tie with the weary satisfaction of someone who'd single-handedly prevented the collapse of civilization. It required understanding both corporate law and tax implications at a level that most attorneys never reach. I had to think 3 steps ahead of opposing counsel while managing client expectations and coordinating with accounting firms. It's not the kind of work everyone can handle. I'd nod and make appropriate sounds of amazement, playing the role of the impressed wife while wondering when exactly my husband had become someone who needed constant validation for doing his actual job. The Daniel I'd married had been confident without being arrogant, successful without being condescending. This version of him seemed to need regular confirmation that he was as brilliant and indispensable as he believed himself to be. The mysterious business trips had started about 18 months ago. Initially, they were occasional. Once every few months, usually to Houston or Austin for client meetings or legal conferences. Daniel would pack his expensive luggage with the focused attention of someone preparing for a military deployment, checking and double-checking that he had everything needed to maintain his professional image while away from home. "The Henderson Group wants me to handle their merger personally," he'd explain, folding his shirts with precise military corners. "They specifically requested me because of my reputation in corporate law. It's a significant opportunity for the firm." He'd kiss my forehead, a gesture so practiced it felt like he was stamping documents, and remind me not to wait up because these corporate types like to work late and discuss business over expensive dinners. "You know how it is with high-level clients, sweetheart. They expect a certain level of sophistication in their legal representation." I'd wave goodbye from our front door, watching his BMW disappear down our tree-lined street, and spend the evening wondering when our marriage had become something that felt more like a business arrangement than a partnership. Daniel would return from these trips, energized in a way I hadn't seen in years, talking enthusiastically about new opportunities and important connections he'd made. He'd seem almost happy, more relaxed and animated than he ever appeared during his regular routine at home. "You should have seen the restaurant they took me to," he'd say, unpacking souvenirs that seemed oddly personal for business dinners. Boutique chocolates, artisanal soaps, small gifts that didn't quite match his usual corporate-focused travel purchases. These clients really know how to appreciate the finer things in life. But as the months passed, the trips became more frequent. What had once been quarterly overnight stays became monthly weekend getaways. The explanations became more elaborate, too. Complex multi-day negotiations that required his personal attention, legal conferences that coincidentally occurred in resort destinations, client entertainment that necessitated extended stays at luxury hotels. The truth started unraveling on a Thursday evening in March that felt different from the moment Daniel walked through our front door. He was packing his overnight bag with the kind of excited energy usually reserved for Christmas morning, humming under his breath while he selected his best shirts and most expensive cologne. "Big client meeting in Austin," he announced, checking his reflection one more time in our bedroom mirror and adjusting his hair with the careful attention of someone preparing for a much more important audience than a corporate legal discussion. The Henderson case could make or break the firm's reputation in corporate law. They've requested me specifically to handle the final negotiations. The story was polished, detailed, and delivered with the kind of casual confidence that probably served him well in front of juries. But something about his enthusiasm struck me as odd. Daniel had never been excited about work trips before. Usually he complained about hotel food and uncomfortable beds, the inconvenience of being away from his preferred routine, and the inferior quality of coffee available in most business hotels. But tonight, he was practically humming while he folded his best shirts, taking extra care with his grooming routine and packing items that seemed oddly luxurious for a standard business trip. Massage oils, expensive wine, clothing that was more appropriate for romantic dinners than corporate meetings. He kissed my forehead with that same practiced gesture that had stopped feeling affectionate years ago and transformed into something that felt more like a business transaction. "Don't wait up, sweetheart. These corporate types like to work late and discuss strategy over dinner. You know how it is with high-level negotiations. They can go well past midnight." "Of course," I said, forcing a smile that probably looked more convincing than it felt. "I hope the meeting goes well." "It will," he said with the kind of absolute confidence that suggested he knew something I didn't. This could be the case that really establishes my reputation in corporate law, the kind of opportunity that changes everything. After he left, I sat in our empty house, listening to the grandfather clock tick in the hallway and trying to identify exactly what felt wrong about the entire interaction. Daniel had seemed almost giddy with anticipation, more excited about this business trip than he'd been about anything related to our marriage in recent memory. The level of care he'd taken with his appearance, the expensive cologne, the careful selection of his most attractive clothing, it all seemed excessive for meetings with corporate executives and legal teams. That's when curiosity got the better of my common sense. Daniel always left his computer open, probably because he figured I was too simple to understand anything important, or perhaps because after 17 years of marriage, he'd stopped considering me a threat to his privacy. His email account was still logged in, and there it was, glowing on our kitchen counter like a beacon of truth I wasn't sure I wanted to see. The hotel confirmation for Austin was right there in his inbox, and it wasn't the kind of standard business reservation I'd expected. Instead of a basic single room at a business-friendly chain hotel, Daniel had booked a king suite at the Four Seasons, complete with spa packages, late checkout, champagne service, and accommodations explicitly designed for 2 guests. Now, I'm no detective, but I know Daniel well enough to know he's never voluntarily set foot in a spa. The man thinks essential oils are a conspiracy theory and considers anything more relaxing than watching legal procedural shows on television to be a waste of time. The idea of him booking couples, massage packages, and champagne service for a business meeting was about as likely as him spontaneously taking up interpretive dance. My heart started doing this uncomfortable dance in my chest, part anger, part hurt, but mostly a strange kind of clarity. After 17 years of feeling like I was slowly disappearing in my own marriage, something sharp and focused was finally cutting through the fog of my daily routine. The pieces were falling into place with the kind of horrible precision that made perfect sense once you stopped pretending not to see the obvious. The expensive cologne, the careful grooming, the excitement about a business trip, The couple's spa packages, the king suite designed for 2 people. I called my best friend Amanda before I could lose my nerve or talk myself out of what I was beginning to suspect. She picked up on the second ring, which was fortunate because I was about 5 seconds away from doing something dramatic and probably illegal. "Girl, you sound weird," Amanda said without preamble, because Amanda's like that. She can read your emotional state through phone acoustics with the precision of a medical diagnostic tool. It's both impressive and slightly terrifying. "I think Daniel's having an affair," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded when everything inside me felt like it was vibrating at the wrong frequency. "Finally!" Amanda exclaimed, then caught herself with the quick backtrack of someone who'd just realized they'd revealed they'd been waiting for this conversation for years. "I mean, I'm sorry, but honey, I've been watching that man act like a single bachelor at every social event since Obama was president." "What do you mean?" "Melissa, do you remember the firm's Christmas party 2 years ago when he slow danced with that paralegal while you were getting drinks? Or last summer at the neighborhood barbecue when he spent 2 hours explaining legal procedures to that divorced woman from Oak Street while completely ignoring you? Or literally any time he's around attractive women under 40 when he thinks you're not paying attention?" I remembered all of those incidents, but I'd convinced myself they were just Daniel being polite, professionally networking, or demonstrating his expertise to people who might benefit from legal advice. The alternative, that my husband was actively flirting with other women in front of me, had seemed too painful to consider seriously. "What are you going to do?" Amanda asked, and I could hear the combination of concern and excitement in her voice that suggested she was ready to support whatever decision I made, no matter how dramatic it might be. That's when the plan started forming in my mind. Not revenge, exactly. More like justice. The kind Daniel was always preaching about in court, but apparently didn't think applied to his personal life. "I'm going to Austin," I said. "Now we're talking. But you're not going alone." The next morning, Amanda showed up at my door with coffee, surveillance equipment that probably wasn't entirely legal, and the kind of determined expression that had gotten us through college finals, my mother's funeral, and every other crisis that had required both emotional support and strategic thinking. Amanda works in security consulting, which is a polite way of saying she knows how to find out things people don't want found and has access to resources that most people couldn't afford or wouldn't think to use. "Road trip," she announced, handing me a latte that was perfectly prepared and probably cost more than Daniel spent on my birthday present last year. "Time to see what Mr. Integrity is really up to." Amanda had come prepared with what she called Operation Spotlight. Her code name, not mine, because Amanda loves drama almost as much as she loves justice. She'd brought professional-grade cameras with telephoto lenses, audio recording equipment, a laptop loaded with tracking software, and a detailed plan for documenting whatever we might discover. "Here's the thing," she explained as we loaded her equipment into my car. "We're not just gathering evidence for a divorce lawyer, though that's certainly part of it. We're documenting behavior patterns for posterity. This man has been making you feel crazy for years, gaslighting you into thinking his obvious red flags were just your imagination. Today, that ends." The drive to Austin took 3 hours, which was exactly enough time for Amanda to brief me on surveillance techniques, explain the legal boundaries of what we could and couldn't document, and help me mentally prepare for whatever we might discover. She'd researched the hotel, mapped out optimal observation points, and even identified backup plans in case Daniel's schedule didn't match our expectations. "The most important thing," she said as we cruised down I-35, "is that we document everything objectively. No emotional reactions that could compromise the evidence. No dramatic confrontations that might give him legal ammunition against you later. We gather facts. We record behavior, and we let the truth speak for itself." We found Daniel's hotel easily enough. The Four Seasons in Austin is the kind of place that screams expense account fraud if you're there for actual business meetings with corporate legal teams. The valet stand, the marble lobby, the carefully landscaped grounds. Everything about it suggested romance and luxury, rather than the kind of efficient business accommodation that would make sense for legal negotiations. We parked across the street in a location that provided clear sight lines to the main entrance, while keeping our vehicle inconspicuous among the other cars in a nearby shopping center. Amanda set up her equipment with the focused precision of someone who'd done this kind of work professionally, testing camera angles and sound levels while I tried to process the surreal experience of spying on my own husband. At 2:47 p.m., Daniel's silver BMW pulled up to the valet stand with perfect punctuality. But he wasn't alone. A young woman, blonde, probably mid-20s, wearing a dress that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, stepped out of the passenger side with the kind of confident elegance that suggested she was very comfortable in expensive surroundings. "That's Jessica," I said quietly, recognizing her from the firm's holiday party 6 months earlier. She was new to the legal team, a paralegal who'd recently graduated from law school and had impressed everyone with her intelligence and ambition. "She just started at Daniel's firm this year." "Of course she did," Amanda muttered, adjusting her camera lens to capture clear images of their interaction. "Because apparently your husband missed the memo about original thinking." They walked into the hotel together, Daniel's hand resting on the small of Jessica's back in that possessive way I remembered from our early dating days. The casual intimacy of the gesture, the way she leaned slightly into his touch, the comfortable familiarity between them, it all spoke to a relationship that had moved far beyond professional mentoring or friendly collegiality. I watched my husband of 17 years guide another woman into a luxury hotel where they would be spending the night together, and what struck me most wasn't the pain or anger I'd expected to feel. Instead, it was a strange sense of clarity, as if a puzzle I'd been trying to solve for months had suddenly revealed its final picture. "How long do you think this has been going on?" I asked Amanda, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Based on the comfort level they're displaying, at least 6 months, maybe longer. This isn't their first romantic getaway together." We spent the rest of the afternoon documenting their activities. They had dinner at the hotel's upscale restaurant, sharing intimate conversation and frequent physical contact that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. They walked through the hotel gardens holding hands. They shared wine on their suite's private balcony, clearly visible from our observation point. But here's where Daniel's luck started running out, though he didn't know it yet. "Phase 2, Amanda announced the next morning. We'd spent the night at a nearby Marriott, which was considerably less luxurious than Daniel's accommodations, but felt infinitely more honest. Time to see where they go when they think nobody's watching. Amanda had done her research and discovered that Daniel and Jessica had made reservations for a day trip to a secluded lake about 30 minutes outside Austin. It was one of those picture-perfect Texas spots. Clear water, limestone cliffs, hidden swimming areas that provided privacy for people who wanted to enjoy nature without crowds or observers. We followed them at a discreet distance, Amanda's professional driving skills keeping us close enough to track their movements without risking detection. They seemed completely relaxed and carefree, the kind of couple who'd moved beyond the nervous excitement of a new affair into the comfortable intimacy of an established relationship. Daniel and Jessica parked his SUV near a cluster of oak trees, far from the main swimming area where other visitors might interrupt their privacy. They were laughing, completely absorbed in each other, carrying towels and what looked like a picnic basket filled with wine and expensive foods that Daniel had never thought to share with me during our 17 years of marriage. "They're about to go swimming," Amanda observed, watching through binoculars as they began setting up their romantic lakeside picnic. "And based on their body language, they're planning to be here for several hours." "So?" Amanda lowered the binoculars and gave me a look that was equal parts mischievous and terrifying. The same expression she'd worn in college when she'd come up with plans that were brilliant, slightly illegal, and absolutely guaranteed to solve whatever problem we were facing. "So they're going to leave all their stuff in the car, including the keys, their phones, their wallets, and all their clothes." Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm not normally the type of person who engages in what might charitably be called creative problem solving. My usual approach to conflict involves polite discussion, reasonable compromise, and the kind of mature communication that marriage counselors recommend. But watching my husband of 17 years preparing to frolic in a romantic lake setting with a woman young enough to be his daughter while using our joint credit cards to fund their luxury weekend getaway had awakened something in me that was apparently very practical about justice. Amanda, what exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, she said, pulling our rental car closer to Daniel's SUV while maintaining enough distance to avoid immediate detection, that Mr. Integrity is about to learn a very important lesson about consequences, the kind of lesson that sticks with you. We watched Daniel and Jessica strip down to their swimsuits with the casual comfort of people who'd done this before. They waded into the lake slowly, laughing and splashing like teenagers, experiencing romance for the first time. It would have been sweet if it weren't so infuriating and expensive. That's when Amanda put her plan into action with the kind of precise timing that probably came from years of professional security work. "Keys are in the ignition," she whispered, approaching Daniel's SUV with practiced stealth. "Phones are on the front seat. Clothes are neatly folded in the back. Wallets, credit cards, identification. Everything they need to function as adults in modern society. We're not stealing," Amanda interrupted with the confident tone of someone who'd thought through all the legal implications. "We're relocating their belongings to a more public location. Everything will be perfectly safe and completely accessible, just not where they expect it to be." 5 minutes later, Daniel's SUV was parked in the lot of a busy truck stop on Highway 71, complete with all their belongings neatly arranged in the front seats, where they would be clearly visible to anyone who cared to look. The car was perfectly safe, properly parked, and positioned where it would attract maximum attention from the steady stream of travelers, truckers, and local residents who frequented the area. Meanwhile, Daniel and Jessica were still in the water, completely oblivious to the fact that their romantic afternoon was about to take a very different turn than they'd planned. "How long do you think it'll take them to realize what happened?" I asked, as we drove to a nearby coffee shop to wait for the inevitable phone calls. "Oh, we'll know," Amanda said, checking her phone and smiling with the satisfaction of someone whose plan was proceeding exactly as intended. "I may have anonymously tipped off a few local social media accounts about some unusual activity at the lake, the kind of activity that might interest people who enjoy documenting unexpected entertainment." The first call came 40 minutes later. My phone rang with Daniel's number, and I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. The increasingly frantic voicemails painted a picture of growing panic and confusion that would have been amusing if it weren't so completely deserved. "Hi, honey." Daniel's voice was strained when I finally answered on the fourth call. "I'm having a little transportation issue. Could you call A for me?" "Transportation issue?" I asked with the kind of innocent concern that any supportive wife would express. "What kind of transportation issue?" "It's complicated. Look, I really need you to call AAA and have them meet me at Crystal Lake. It's quite urgent." In the background, I could hear Jessica's voice, high and panicked. "Daniel, people are filming. There are cars slowing down." "I'm so sorry to hear about your transportation problems," I said sweetly, using the same tone I'd perfected during 17 years of pretending to be interested in Daniel's legal victories. "But I'm actually having lunch with Amanda right now. You know how she gets when someone interrupts her stories." "Melissa, this is serious." "I'm sure AA will sort everything out. You're so good at solving problems, honey. I have complete faith in your ability to handle whatever situation you've gotten yourself into." I hung up and turned to Amanda, who was monitoring local social media with the dedication of a NASA mission controller, tracking a space launch. "Oh my God," she whispered, showing me her phone screen. "It's already starting." The first video had been posted 12 minutes ago by someone with the username Ari Lake Life Texas. It showed two people, clearly Daniel and Jessica, though shot from a distance, walking along the lakeside trail, using large oak leaves and small branches to maintain what was left of their dignity. The video was slightly shaky, and the lighting wasn't perfect, but Daniel's face was unmistakable to anyone who'd seen his professional headshots or television commercials. The caption read, "Y'all, is this that lawyer from the billboards? Pay me, naked and afraid, Texas lawyer." By the time the second video appeared on a different account, someone had recognized Daniel from his TV commercials and professional advertising. By the time the third video was posted to TikTok, Naked Lawyer was trending locally and spreading beyond Austin's immediate area. "This is better than I could have possibly imagined," Amanda said, scrolling through the rapidly accumulating comments with the focused attention of someone monitoring a successful military operation. "Look at this one. Isn't this the guy who gave that speech about family values at the Chamber of Commerce dinner? And this one, my divorce lawyer's about to get some competition, The videos kept multiplying throughout the afternoon, each one capturing Daniel and Jessica's increasingly desperate attempts to find their missing vehicle and belongings while maintaining some semblance of modesty. Someone had filmed them arguing by the side of the road. Another video showed them attempting to flag down passing cars for assistance. A particularly popular clip featured Daniel trying to explain their situation to a confused park ranger while using a small tree branch for coverage. My phone rang again, and this time I answered on the first ring with the kind of cheerful promptness that any good wife would display when her husband needed assistance. "Melissa!" Daniel's voice was raw with panic and rage. "What did you do?" "I had lunch with Amanda. Very nice salmon, thank you for asking. How are your business meetings going?" "Don't play games with me. I know you're behind this somehow." "Daniel," I said, letting 17 years of accumulated frustration settle into my voice like honey on warm biscuits. "I'm just sitting here enjoying my afternoon with my dear friend, same as always. Though I have to say, you sound a little stressed. Maybe you should take a vacation. I hear Austin has some lovely lakes for swimming." The silence on the other end was beautiful. "You're going to regret this," he finally said, his voice carrying the kind of threats that probably served him well in legal negotiations, but fell flat when delivered by someone who was presumably still hiding behind vegetation. "You know what, Daniel? I really don't think I am." Are you enjoying Melissa's perfectly planned revenge? Hit the like button and let me know in the comments what you think about her creative approach to dealing with a cheating husband, because this story is just getting started, and you won't believe what happens when Daniel tries to fight back. The videos continued accumulating throughout the afternoon and into the evening, each one adding another layer to what was rapidly becoming Austin's most entertaining social media story of the year. Someone had recognized Jessica as well, identifying her as a paralegal from Daniel's law firm, which added workplace scandal to the adultery drama. By evening, the story had been picked up by local news stations. "Prominent Attorneys Lake Day Goes Viral" was the headline on Channel 8's website, complete with carefully censored screenshots from the most popular videos and quotes from social media users who were having entirely too much fun with the situation. They'd obviously found their way back to civilization eventually, probably with the help of that confused park ranger or a sympathetic passerby who'd taken pity on their situation. But not before half of Austin had gotten a very different perspective on Daniel's commitment to professional dignity and personal integrity. Daniel came home that night looking like he'd aged about 5 years in 8 hours. His usually immaculate appearance had been replaced by wrinkled clothes, disheveled hair, and the kind of shell-shocked expression typically reserved for natural disaster survivors. The confident swagger that normally announced his presence from 3 rooms away had evaporated completely. "We need to talk," he announced, standing in our kitchen doorway like he was about to deliver closing arguments to a hostile jury that had already made up its mind. "Of course we do," I agreed, not bothering to look up from the magazine I was reading. "How was your business meeting with the Henderson Group?" "Don't. Just don't." Daniel slumped into the chair across from me, and for the first time in years, he looked genuinely uncertain. The commanding presence that had dominated our household for so long had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like vulnerability. It was oddly satisfying to watch. "You humiliated me," he said, his voice carrying the kind of wounded indignation that suggested he genuinely believed he was the victim in this situation. "I had lunch with Amanda and spent a lovely afternoon catching up with my dear friend. You humiliated yourself by choosing to have an extramarital affair and documenting it on social media. That's not—" He stopped, seeming to realize that any explanation would only dig his hole deeper. "What do you want?" "I want you to pack your things and find somewhere else to stay while we figure out what comes next." "You can't throw me out of my own house." "Daniel, honey," I said, finally looking up from my magazine with the kind of patient expression usually reserved for explaining simple concepts to small children. "You're a lawyer. You know exactly how community property works in Texas. You also know what 17 years of documented infidelity and financial misconduct does to a divorce settlement, especially when it's been broadcast to half the state." His face went through several interesting color changes as the legal implications began sinking in. "Documented." I smiled the way Daniel used to smile at opposing counsel when he knew he had them cornered and was about to deliver the kind of legal maneuver that would be discussed in law school classrooms for years to come. "Amanda's very thorough. She's also very good with cameras, social media, and financial investigations, and she has a lot of friends in interesting places who specialize in finding information that people prefer to keep private." The thing about Daniel is that he's actually a pretty good lawyer when he's not distracted by his own ego and extramarital activities. It didn't take him long to realize that his position was, legally speaking, what's known in professional circles as completely screwed. "What kind of documentation are we talking about?" he asked quietly, probably calculating exactly how much this was going to cost him both professionally and financially. "The kind that makes headlines, the kind that gets shared on social media platforms, the kind that makes prominent attorneys unemployed and affects their ability to practice law in the state of Texas." Daniel was quiet for a long time, no doubt running through various legal scenarios and calculating the potential damage to both his career and his financial future. I could practically see his attorney brain working through the implications, weighing his options, and coming to the inevitable conclusion that he had very few good choices remaining. "I'll sue you for intentional infliction of emotional distress," he said finally, reaching for the kind of legal threat that had probably intimidated people throughout his career. "With what evidence? I had lunch with a friend while you went swimming with your mistress. I'm not seeing the part of this story where I committed any actionable wrongdoing. You orchestrated this entire situation. Daniel, I think you're giving me too much credit for strategic thinking. I'm just a simple housewife, remember? Too naive to understand complicated legal matters or sophisticated business operations? Too unsophisticated to keep up with your professional achievements?" The irony was not lost on him, and I could see the moment when he realized that 17 years of condescending remarks had just been turned into legal ammunition against him. Over the next few weeks, Daniel discovered just how quickly a reputation built on performance and image could crumble when the performance was revealed to be fundamentally dishonest and the image was contradicted by viral social media content. The partners at his law firm were decidedly not amused by the videos, which had continued spreading across multiple platforms and generated the kind of publicity that law firms typically spend significant money to avoid. Apparently, having your senior partner's face associated with public indecency and adultery doesn't align with a firm's commitment to ethical excellence and professional integrity. Daniel was asked to take an indefinite leave of absence while the firm's management evaluated the situation and its potential impact on client relationships. This was lawyer speak for, "You're fired, but we're going to make it sound more professional." His biggest clients began finding creative reasons to transfer their business elsewhere. the Henderson Group, the account that was supposed to establish Daniel's reputation in corporate law, hired different representation, citing concerns about maintaining appropriate professional image standards in their legal team. The State Bar of Texas opened an ethics investigation into Daniel's professional conduct, both personal and professional. It turns out that when you become a public spectacle involving moral turpitude, regulatory organizations start examining your work more closely. They discovered some interesting discrepancies in Daniel's billing practices, client fund management, and professional representation that had somehow escaped notice when his reputation was intact. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence was watching Daniel realize that his carefully constructed image of success, respectability, and professional excellence was just that, an image. And images, as he learned through painful experience, can be destroyed much more quickly than they can be built, especially in the age of social media and viral content. Meanwhile, I was discovering something interesting about myself that had been buried under 17 years of playing the supportive wife role. I was actually a pretty capable, intelligent person who had simply forgotten how to function independently because I'd spent so long defining myself in relation to Daniel's achievements and expectations. Amanda helped me find an excellent divorce attorney, not one of Daniel's colleagues, obviously, but someone with a stellar reputation for protecting women's interests in high-asset divorce cases involving professional misconduct. Margaret Chen was the kind of attorney that other attorneys both respected and feared. She'd built her practice on cases exactly like mine. Successful professional men who'd underestimated their wives and overestimated their own cleverness. Her office walls were decorated with thank you letters from women who'd walked away from their marriages with both their dignity and their financial security intact. "Mrs. Rodriguez," she said during our initial consultation, reviewing the evidence Amanda had meticulously compiled, "this is one of the most thoroughly documented cases of marital misconduct I've seen in 20 years of practice. Your husband appears to have created a perfect storm of professional ethics violations, financial impropriety, and public embarrassment." She spread the photographs, videos, financial records, and social media screenshots across her conference table, like someone laying out a winning hand of cards. The viral nature of his behavior actually works in your favor legally. It demonstrates a pattern of reckless judgment that affects his credibility as both a spouse and a professional. Margaret explained that Texas law would allow us to pursue a disproportionate division of community property based on Daniel's misconduct, his misuse of marital funds for his affair, and the damage his actions had caused to both our family's reputation and my emotional well-being. "The social media documentation is particularly valuable," she continued, pointing to printouts of the most damaging videos and comments. "It establishes a timeline, demonstrates the public nature of his humiliation of your marriage, and creates a permanent record that he can't dispute or minimize." While Margaret handled the legal strategy, I began the process of reclaiming my own life and identity. The house felt different without Daniel's constant presence and criticism, lighter somehow, more like a home and less like a performance space designed to showcase his achievements. I started cooking foods I actually enjoyed instead of whatever would properly complement Daniel's sophisticated palate. I rearranged furniture to suit my preferences rather than his ideas about impressive interior design. I invited friends over without worrying about whether they would meet Daniel's standards for social acceptability. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living in my own space rather than existing as a supporting character in Daniel's carefully curated life story. The financial investigation that Amanda had initiated revealed even more interesting details about Daniel's professional conduct. It turned out that his business trips with Jessica had been funded not just by our joint accounts, but also by client expense accounts that he'd been systematically overcharging for years. "Your husband has been running a fairly sophisticated embezzlement scheme," Margaret explained during one of our strategy sessions. "He's been inflating his travel expenses, billing personal entertainment as client development, and using the law firm's credit cards for unauthorized purchases. The social media scandal prompted his partners to audit his accounts more carefully, and they're finding irregularities going back almost 3 years. This information transformed our divorce case from a simple adultery situation into something much more serious. Daniel wasn't just facing the end of his marriage. He was looking at potential criminal charges, disbarment proceedings, and civil lawsuits from both his former law firm and the clients he'd defrauded. The irony, Margaret observed with the kind of professional satisfaction that comes from watching justice work exactly as it should, is that his affair with Jessica was actually the least serious of his ethical violations. The financial crimes are what will ultimately destroy his career and his freedom. Meanwhile, Daniel's attempts to salvage his situation were becoming increasingly desperate and increasingly public. He hired his own attorney, someone from a different firm who specialized in defending professionals facing ethics violations, and began trying to control the narrative around his behavior. He gave an interview to a local legal newspaper, attempting to frame his situation as a personal mistake that had been blown out of proportion by social media culture. Everyone deserves privacy in their personal relationships, he claimed. The public humiliation I've endured is completely disproportionate to any mistakes I may have made. Unfortunately for Daniel, the interview only drew more attention to his situation and prompted additional investigation into his professional conduct. Several former clients came forward with complaints about his billing practices. Other attorneys began sharing their own stories about Daniel's behavior at professional events and client meetings. The Texas legal community, it turned out, had been aware of Daniel's arrogance and questionable ethics for years. The viral videos had simply provided the catalyst for people to speak publicly about concerns they'd previously kept private. Jessica, meanwhile, had been quietly terminated from the law firm and was reportedly looking for work in a different field entirely. The legal community in Texas is smaller than most people realize, and her association with Daniel's scandal had effectively ended her career in law before it had really begun. I found myself feeling somewhat sorry for her, despite everything. She was young, probably naive about the power dynamics in her relationship with Daniel, and she was paying a professional price that seemed disproportionate to her actual role in the situation. Daniel had been the married one, the senior partner, the person with both the power and the responsibility to maintain appropriate boundaries. But my sympathy was limited by the knowledge that she'd participated willingly in spending money that belonged to my marriage, and she'd certainly seemed to enjoy the luxury vacations and expensive dinners that my financial contributions had funded. 3 months after the lake incident, I was sitting in my lawyer's office reviewing divorce settlement papers that were extraordinarily favorable to my future independence when Margaret's phone rang with news that changed everything again. "That was the district attorney's office," she said after hanging up. "They're filing criminal charges against your husband for embezzlement, fraud, and misuse of client funds. The investigation prompted by his law firm's audit has uncovered evidence of systematic financial crimes totaling more than $200,000. Daniel's situation had moved far beyond embarrassing social media content into serious felony territory. The viral videos that had seemed like the worst thing that could happen to him were now the least of his legal problems. "What does this mean for our divorce case?" I asked. "It means you're about to become a much wealthier single woman," Margaret replied with professional satisfaction. "When someone is facing criminal charges for financial crimes, family court judges become very generous with asset division. The court will want to ensure that you're protected from any financial liability for his illegal activities." That evening, I was preparing dinner in my kitchen. My kitchen now, according to the preliminary divorce agreement, when I realized something that would have seemed impossible just 6 months earlier. I was genuinely happy. Not the performance of happiness I'd maintained throughout my marriage, but actual contentment. The kind that comes from finally living authentically instead of constantly adjusting yourself to fit someone else's expectations and requirements. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. Dinner tomorrow to celebrate your freedom? I found this amazing new restaurant downtown. My treat to honor your brilliant strategic planning. I typed back, sounds perfect, but I'm buying. I can afford it now and I want to celebrate properly. And I could afford it. The divorce settlement was going to be generous. I'd started working part-time as a consultant for Margaret's law firm, helping other women navigate divorce proceedings. And for the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based on what I wanted rather than what someone else expected or required. The work with Margaret's firm was particularly satisfying. My experience with Daniel's manipulation tactics and financial deception had given me insights that proved valuable when counseling other women who were dealing with similar situations. I understood the psychological patterns, the warning signs, and the strategies that manipulative spouses use to maintain control. You have a natural talent for this, Margaret told me during one of our case consultations. You understand both the legal and emotional aspects of these cases in ways that someone who hasn't lived through it simply cannot. 6 months after the lake incident, I ran into Daniel at the courthouse where I was finalizing some paperwork related to our divorce settlement. He was there for a hearing related to his criminal charges, accompanied by his defense attorney and looking significantly different from the confident man who'd once dominated every room he entered. The expensive suits had been replaced by something more appropriate to his reduced circumstances. His hair wasn't perfectly styled, his shoes weren't shiny, and his confidence had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like genuine humility, mixed with barely controlled panic. "Melissa," he said, nodding awkwardly when he noticed me in the hallway. "Daniel, how are you managing?" "Fine, different, challenging." We stood there for a moment in uncomfortable silence, two people who'd once shared 17 years of marriage now reduced to polite strangers, making awkward small talk in a courthouse hallway. "I started my own practice," he said eventually, though his voice lacked the enthusiasm that had once characterized his discussions of professional achievements. Small cases, mostly. Criminal defense, personal injury. Not as glamorous as corporate law, but it's honest work. The irony of Daniel discovering the value of honest work at this stage of his life was not lost on me, though I managed to keep my expression neutral. "I'm glad you found something that suits your current situation," I said, and I meant it. Not because I wished him well, necessarily, but because there was something poetic about Daniel finally having to build a reputation based on actual competence rather than performance and image management. "Melissa, He stopped, seeming to struggle with words that had probably never been part of his vocabulary during our marriage. "I owe you an apology. For many things." "You do," I agreed, "but not necessarily to me. You owe it to yourself to figure out how you became someone who could justify treating another person the way you treated me." I left him standing there in the courthouse hallway, probably wondering when I'd become comfortable with having the last word in our conversations, and confident enough to offer psychological insights rather than just accepting whatever narrative he preferred to present. That evening, as I was cooking dinner and listening to music I actually enjoyed rather than whatever Daniel had deemed appropriately sophisticated, my phone rang with a call from an unexpected source. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Patricia Williams from Channel 8 News. We're doing a follow-up story on the viral video situation from several months ago, and we'd love to get your perspective on how the incident affected your family." I considered the request carefully. 6 months ago, I would have immediately declined, terrified of drawing additional attention to what I would have seen as a humiliating situation. But now, with the perspective that comes from having successfully reclaimed control of my life, I found myself interested in the opportunity. "What kind of story are you planning?" I asked. "We're looking at the broader implications of social media accountability, particularly in cases involving professional misconduct. Your husband's situation has become something of a case study in how personal behavior can have professional consequences in the digital age." The interview, which aired the following week, became another viral sensation, though this time for very different reasons. Instead of humiliation and scandal, it showcased transformation, empowerment, and the unexpected ways that devastating personal betrayals can sometimes lead to positive life changes. I spent 17 years trying to be the person my husband wanted me to be, I said during the televised interview, sitting in my beautifully redecorated living room and looking more confident than I'd felt in decades. It took a viral video of his infidelity for me to realize that I'd forgotten who I actually was underneath all that performance. The interviewer asked about the revenge aspect of the situation, clearly hoping for dramatic details about planning and execution. I didn't plan what happened at the lake, I explained honestly. That was simply Daniel facing the natural consequences of his choices. What I did plan was my response to discovering those choices. I chose to document the truth, protect my financial interests, and reclaim my life. That wasn't revenge. It was justice. The interview generated hundreds of supportive comments from women who'd experienced similar betrayals and found inspiration in my story. Several reached out directly, asking for advice about their own situations or referrals to attorneys who specialized in cases involving professional misconduct and financial deception. Margaret offered me a full-time position as a victim advocate and case consultant, working specifically with women who were navigating divorces from high-earning, manipulative spouses. The work was challenging and emotionally demanding, but also incredibly rewarding. You have a gift for helping women understand that they're not crazy, they're not overreacting, and they deserve better treatment, Margaret told me during my 6-month performance review. Your combination of personal experience and natural empathy makes you uniquely effective at this work. A year after the lake incident, Amanda and I were celebrating the anniversary with dinner at the restaurant where we'd first planned our Operation Spotlight surveillance mission. We'd made it an annual tradition, partly because the food was excellent and partly because it felt important to acknowledge the day that had changed everything. Any regrets? Amanda asked, raising her wine glass in our traditional toast to consequences and justice. About Daniel? None whatsoever, I replied honestly. About not doing something about his behavior earlier? Maybe. But I wasn't ready to see the truth until I was ready to act on it. And now? I looked around the restaurant filled with couples and families enjoying their evening together and thought about how different my life had become. I had work that mattered to me, financial independence, a home that felt like my own space, and relationships based on mutual respect rather than performance and power dynamics. Now I understand something I wish I'd learned earlier, I said. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their choices. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop trying to manage other people's consequences. Amanda nodded, understanding the deeper truth behind my words. To natural consequences, she said, clinking her glass against mine. To natural consequences, I agreed, thinking about Daniel's ongoing legal troubles, his struggling solo practice, his damaged reputation, and his apparent journey towards something that might eventually resemble genuine self-awareness. Justice, I'd learned, doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like a cheating husband stranded naked at a lake because he was too arrogant to consider that his actions might have consequences. Sometimes it looks like a woman discovering she's stronger and more capable than she'd ever imagined. And sometimes it looks like a viral video that becomes a catalyst for positive change rather than just public humiliation. The moral of the story, if there is one, is simple. If you're going to preach integrity, you'd better be prepared to live up to it. Because in the age of social media and smartphones, everything eventually comes to light. And if you're married to someone who's been underestimating your intelligence and strength for 17 years, well, you might want to reconsider that strategy before you end up walking naked down a highway in Texas while half the internet laughs at your poor life choices. As I've learned, there's nothing quite as satisfying as watching someone discover that their carefully constructed image was just that. A construction that could be dismantled by their own actions and a little bit of well-timed consequences. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just letting people reap exactly what they've sown, while you build a better life from the seeds they thought they'd destroyed. What did you think of Melissa's complete transformation? Was her approach to Daniel's infidelity justified, or should she have handled things differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing different perspectives on these complex situations.